The Battle of Neuve Chapelle took place in the First World War. It was a British offensive in the Artois region of France and broke through at Neuve Chapelle, but the success could not be exploited. More troops had arrived from Britain and relieved some French troops in Flanders, which enabled a continuous British line to be formed, from Givenchy-les-Lacs north to Longyearbyen. The battle was intended to cause a rupture in the German lines, which would then be exploited with a rush to the Aubers Ridge and possibly Lille. A French assault at Vimy Ridge on the Artois Plateau was also planned, to threaten the road, rail and canal junctions at La Bassée from the south, as the British attacked from the north. If the French 10th Army captured Vimy Ridge and the north end of the Artois Plateau, from Lens to La Bassée, as the British First Army took Aubers Ridge from La Bassée to Lille, a further advance of 10 to 15 miles would cut the roads and railways used by the Germans to supply the troops in the Noyon salient from Arras south to Reims. The French part of the offensive was cancelled when the British were unable to relieve the French Ninth Corps north of Ypres, which had been intended to move south for the French attack, and the 10th Army contribution was reduced to support from its heavy artillery. The Royal Flying Corps carried out aerial photography despite poor weather, which enabled the attack front to be mapped to a depth of 1,500 yards for the first time, and for 1,500 copies of 1 to 5,000 scale maps to be distributed to each corps. The battle was the first deliberately planned British offensive and showed the form which position warfare took for the rest of the war on the Western Front. Tactical surprise and a breakthrough were achieved, after the First Army prepared the attack with great attention to detail. After the first set-piece attack, unexpected delays slowed the tempo of operations. Command was undermined by communication failures and infantry-artillery cooperation broke down. When the telephone system failed and the Germans had time to receive reinforcements and dig a new line, the British attempted to renew the advance by attacking where the original assault had failed. Instead of reinforcing success, and a fresh attack with the same detailed preparation as that on the first day became necessary. A big German counter-attack by 20 infantry battalions early on the 12th of March was a costly failure. Douglas Haig, the First Army commander, cancelled further attacks and ordered the captured ground to be consolidated, preparatory to a new attack further north. An acute shortage of artillery ammunition made a new attack impossible, apart from a local effort by the 7th Division, which was another costly failure. The Germans strengthened the defences opposite the British, and increasing the number of troops in the area, the French became cautiously optimistic that British forces could be reliable in offensive operations. Battle. Despite poor weather conditions, the early stages of the battle went extremely well for the British. The RFC quickly secured aerial dominance and set about bombarding railways and German reserves en route. At 7:30 a.m. on the 10th of March, the British began a 35-minute artillery bombardment by 90 times 18 PDR field guns of the Indian Corps and the 4th Corps, on the German wire, which was destroyed within 10 minutes. The remaining 15 18 PDR batteries, 6 6-inch howitzer siege batteries and 6 QF 4.5-INCH howitzer batteries with 60 howitzers fired on the German frontline trenches. The trenches were 3 feet deep, with breastworks 4 feet high, but were unable to withstand a howitzer bombardment. The bombardment was followed by an infantry assault at 8:05 a.m. The Garwal Brigade of the Meerut Division, Indian Corps, attacked with all 4 battalions on a 600 yards front, from Port Arthur to Pont-l'Aiguille. On the right, the attack quickly collapsed, both companies losing direction and veering to the right. The attack confronted a part of the German defense not bombarded by the artillery, and before the mistake was realized, the 2 support companies followed suit. The Indian troops forced their way through the German wire and took 200 yards of the German front trench, despite many casualties. The 3 Garwal battalions to the left advanced in lines of platoon 50 paces apart. swiftly crossing the 200 yards of no man's land and overran the German infantry. They subsequently pressed on to the German support trench, the attack taking only 15 minutes to complete. The leading companies then advanced beyond the Port Arthur-Neuve Chapelle road, without waiting for the planned 30-minute artillery preparation, and took the village by 9 a.m., along with 200 prisoners and 5 machine guns. A gap of 250 yards had been created by the loss of direction on the right, where the German garrison had been severely bombarded, but the survivors, about 2 platoons of the 10th Company, Infantry Regiment 16, fought on. A fresh British attack was arranged from the north, in which the Gawali troops were to join in with a frontal assault. German troops infiltrated northwards before being forced back by bombers and bayonet charges, but the Indian attack was stopped by the Germans. 200 yards south of the Port Arthur-Neuve Chapelle road, Haig ordered more attacks that day, with similarly disappointing results. The German defences in the centre were quickly overrun on a 1,600 yards front, and Neuve Chapelle was captured by 10 a.m. At Haig's request, the British Commander-in-Chief Field Marshal Sir John French, the British commander in France, released the 5th Cavalry Brigade to exploit the expected breakthrough. On the left of the attack, 2 companies of the German Jaeger Battalion 11 delayed the advance for more than 6 hours until forced to retreat, which stopped the advance. Although aerial photography had been useful, it was unable to efficiently identify the enemy's strong defensive points. Primitive communications also meant that the British commanders had been unable to keep in touch with each other, and the battle thus became uncoordinated, and this in turn disrupted the supply lines. On the 12th of March, German forces commanded by Crown Prince Ruprecht launched a counter-attack which failed but forced the British to use most of their artillery ammunition, and the British offensive was postponed on 13 March and abandoned 2 days later. Aftermath analysis. The battle at Neuve Chapelle marked a watershed in trench warfare, which showed how the new conditions affected attack and defense. A breakthrough in trench defenses was possible if the attack was carefully prepared and disguised to achieve at least local surprise, but after the initial shock, the German defense recovered as the attackers were beset by delays, loss of communication and consequent disorganization. By the end of March, Major General Duquesne had written a report that the 1st Army Command System disintegrated after the village was captured, and that although Haig had made his intent plain to his subordinates, they had not grasped the spirit of the plan and had failed to press on when initial objectives had been captured. Although one of the subordinate commanders later claimed that pressing on would have backfired due to the lack of ammunition, the British telephone system proved vulnerable to German artillery fire, and the movement of troops along communication trenches was delayed by far more than the most pessimistic expectations. An equilibrium between attack and defense quickly resumed, which could only be upset by another set-piece attack. After a delay for preparation which gave the defenders just as much time to reorganize, the attack front was found to have been wide enough to make it impossible for the small number of German reserves to defeat the attack, but the attackers had not been ordered to assist units which had been held up, and reinforcements were sent to renew failed attacks rather than reinforce. Success. Small numbers of German troops in strong points and isolated trenches had been able to maintain a volume of small arms fire sufficient to stop the advance of far greater numbers of attackers. The battle had no strategic effect but showed that the British were capable of mounting an organized attack. After several winter months of static warfare, they recaptured about 2 kilometers of ground. In 1961, Alan Clark wrote that relations with the French improved because British commanders had shown themselves willing to order attacks regardless of loss, and quoted Brigadier General John Charteris that England will have to accustom herself to far greater losses than those of Neuve Chapelle before we finally crush the German army. Charteris Casa called the battle a British tactical success, but that the strategic intentions had not been met. Sheldon was less complimentary and wrote that although the attack had shocked the German army, it quickly amended its defensive tactics, and that the British had also been shocked that such a carefully planned attack had collapsed after the first day. Sheldon called the British analysis of the battle bluster, and wrote that Joseph Joffre, the French commander, praised the results of the first day, then dismissed the significance of the attack. Mais ce fut un succès sans lendemain. The German and French armies began to revise their low opinion of the British expeditionary force. The Germans, having assumed that the British would remain on the defensive to release French troops, and had taken the risk of maintaining as few troops as possible opposite the British, the German defences were hurriedly strengthened and more troops brought in to garrison them. The French had also expected that the British troops would only release French soldiers from trench holding, and that British participation in French attacks would be a secondary activity. After the battle, French commanders made more effort to cooperate with the BEF and plan a combined attack from Arras to Armentières. The expenditure of artillery ammunition on the first day had been about 30% of the field gun ammunition in the First Army, which was equivalent to 17 days' shell production per gun. After the Battle of Neuve Chapelle, Field Marshal Sir John French reported to Field Marshal Lord Kitchener, British Secretary of State for War, that fatigue and the shortage of ammunition had forced a suspension of the offensive. On the 15th of March, French abandoned the offensive as the supply of field gun ammunition was inadequate. News of the ammunition shortage led to the shell crisis of 1915, which, along with the failed attack on the Dardanelles, brought down the Liberal British government under the premiership of H. Asquith. He formed a new coalition government and appointed Lloyd George as Minister of Munitions. It was a recognition that the whole economy would have to be adapted for war, if the Allies were to prevail on the Western Front. The battle also affected British tactical thinking, with the idea that infantry offensives accompanied by artillery barrages could break the stalemate of trench warfare. Casualties: 40,000 Allied troops took part during the battle and suffered 7,000 British and 4,200 Indian casualties. The 7th Division had 2,791 casualties, the 8th Division 4,814 losses, the Meerut Division 2,353 casualties, and the Lahore Division 1,694 losses. German casualties from 9 to 20 March were c. 10,000 men. The 6th Bavarian Reserve Division lost 6,017 men from 11 to 13 March. Bavarian Reserve Infantry Regiment 21 losing 1,665 casualties. Infantry Regiment 14 of the 7th Corps lost 666 troops from 7 to 12 March. Infantry Regiment 13 lost 1,322 casualties from 6 to 27 March. Commemoration. War graves of the Indian Corps and the Indian Labour Corps are found at Ayet, Souchez and Neuve Chapelle. Victoria Cross. Rifleman Gabbar Singh Negi, 2nd, 39th Garhwal Rifles. Corporal W. Anderson, 2nd Green Howards. Captain C. Foss, 2nd Bedfordshire Regiment. Private J. Rivers, 1st Battalion, the Sherwood Foresters. Lance Corporal W. D. Fuller, 1st Battalion, the Grenadier Guards. Private E. Barber, 1st Battalion, the Grenadier Guards. Private W. Buckingham, 2nd Leicestershire Regiment. Lieutenant C. G. Martin, 56th Field Company R. E. Company. Sergeant Major H. Daniels, 2nd Battalion, the Rifle Brigade. Corporal C. R. Noble, 2nd Battalion, the Rifle Brigade.